So this is our second brainstorming session. Um, uh, Tomorrow actually is the International Day of Monuments and Sites, and this is a special time that the whole of ICOMOS and the whole of the heritage world actually thinks about the heritage for a particular topic. Right. The brainstorming session today has a certain focus, and I will describe more a little bit later. We have a logo here of the International Day of Monuments and Sites, but what you don't see here is that it is in a native language, in Filipino, in my native tongue. So this International Day of Monuments and Sites, as a background, is derived from this idea of complex pasts and diverse futures. As you've seen last year, there's this great issue of the Black Lives Matter, and there's a lot of things that have happened on the toppling of monuments in several places in the U.S. and in Europe, and it calls upon a greater recognition of inclusion and diversity. The picture that we see here on the right is taken at Lafayette Park, and this is Andrew Jackson, people were trying to pull the monument down because of his treatment of Native Americans. There's a lot of considerations on or like issues that have come out after that, and as a lot of people in Europe also know that this has happened in that area as well. Now,
is this the White House? No.
Huh? Yes. If you see that is in front of it.
Ah, yeah.
So, but and then Trump came out and said that this is like this is about wiping out our history, wiping out the Confederate history. But the question is, what type of history is it, right? So there's a meeting that ICOMOS Germany provided with ICOMOS, and I was part of the moderators there as well, in July of 2020, which called for diversifying or decolonizing heritage, and identifying potentials of having conversations on racialized issues in heritage. And that led to further discussions after on a lot of different fronts on inclusive heritage practices. Of course, in ICOMOS, we also have the rights-based approach, which is another working group is dealing with that. And it led to, at the end of the year, a suggestion from US ICOMOS to think about these diverse futures. What does it really mean, right? So one thing to point out as well, as heritage practitioners, we are those people who are responsible for valorizing particular types of heritage. In selecting one type of heritage, there's a possibility of excluding certain types of heritage. So the responsibility is on us to provide more, openness to different types of practices and heritage places. Now, these things don't only happen in the urban setting. Rural settings also have issues of non-inclusion of people and indigenous people and communities, and different types of heritage practices. So I do hope that we start looking into that and really think about our heritage practice. So this one I've mentioned in our first brainstorming session. The brainstorming session is about listening to various perspectives and integrating heritage in sustainable development. It is a means of creating a shared base of knowledge to level off ideas. Anyone can be discussing here. We're in a private platform that we think about these issues and see how we navigate a lot of different, perhaps sometimes conflicting issues in the heritage practice. This is a time to also test out ideas and improve our ways of working, learn and share and co-create knowledge, and provide an informal space to think and share views. This second brainstorming session is about inclusivity, gender equality, and indigenous people. We have two guest discussants today, which will be discussing empowering women and marginalized entrepreneurs in the heritage practice. Larry Coben, who was with us for our webinar series before, would also be sharing his ideas. He had a video recording he just sent today. And Edson Cabell Finn from ICOMOS Philippines, who's from Tulane University, will be providing LGBTQ plus heritage sites for equity, diversity, and inclusion. This will be 50-minute conversations, and then there will be a 20-minute discussion afterwards. And then there will be an NC and ISC sharing after that. Yeah. So I'll end here for the moment. Larry has asked me to provide a video presentation, but he's here. He will be coming in. It's already 5 o'clock in the morning in where he is. But let me show you his video presentation, and we can have questions and discussions afterwards. Yeah. Hold on. Let me just share his video. Wait, I will have to share screen. Advanced sharing session. Okay, wait, let me just double. Excuse me for a bit. Yeah, hold on. Okay, good. So let me know if you will hear the video. Yeah. Oops, not this one. Where is the video? 1 second. Sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. Where's the video? Okay, share screen. Screen to perhaps share sound. Okay, let me know if you will hear it. Yeah. Oops, sorry. You're seeing my screen. Wait, where is my video? Okay, sorry. Technical difficulties. Okay, hold on. Share screen again. Share screen. Wait, I'm getting lost in my share screen. New share screen. There you go. Okay, got it. Can you see the video? Yeah.
Yes,
okay,
we can.
now...
Yeah, we can see the video.
Yes.
Okay, so I will have to play. Do you wait? Let's see if we hear the sound. I cannot see my... Oh, there you go. So play sound. Okay, there you go.
Good morning or evening, depending on where you are in the world. I'd like to thank Gabe Caballero for inviting me to give this talk, which, as you can see, is entitled Empowering Women and Marginalized Entrepreneurs in Heritage Practice, a subject which I think some of you know is very near and dear to my heart. But as we think about the SDGs are really designed to bring women and people who are marginalized in a variety of ways, and some of which I'm sure we'll hear about today, into a more equal place within society. And to do that, of course, we need to bring those people forward, not just in the world of policy, but in the world of heritage. And quite frankly, in these meetings, I'd like to hear more voices of those women and those who are marginalized at these kinds of conferences. And I hope to try to bring some of their voices to you here today. Now, in order to talk about women's entrepreneurship, really the focus is, of course, goal number 5 of the SDGs, which is gender equality. But given the importance of economic and educational equality to the achievement of this goal, obviously numerous other goals are directly implicated. You see a list here relating to poverty, relating to hunger and health. Goals 1, 2, and 3 are critical, but deeply, deeply, deeply tied to gender equality and economic development. Quality education, I hope demonstrate a little bit, and I have in prior talks, is critical as well to the achievement of this goal, as is decent work and economic growth. The result of that should be reduced inequalities in a more sustainable community for folks to live in. Now, I want to talk about 4 different ways that we need, things that I think heritage practitioners need to do in order to achieve the kind of results that I want to talk about, to bring women forward, to empower them, and they and these other marginalized entrepreneurs. Rule number 1, and I'll adjust each of these as I go forward, but the 4 of them are: first, listen to the women and the marginalized, tailor your objectives to meet theirs, and let them speak to the results. Too many of our programs have some abstract heritage result in mind, which is not what's desired or needed by the community which they're purporting to serve. Second, the broad diversity of goals that I just talked about should really prove beyond a reasonable doubt that we need to include lots of experts from other fields, defer to them, and often let them lead. Related to that, if we want to have policy influence, if we want to persuade people, if we want to not always be the group that gets the smallest amount of the budget and the remains and the scraps of what is left of the SDG table, we need to speak the language of others and persuade them using their own language. And lastly, and critically important, I think we need to use far more data, particularly quantitative data. So let's go to number one of those points, listening to the women. Every program should begin with asking what they need is what is important to them. Now, I have worked in several poor communities and 4 continents. And rarely, if ever, when I ask that question of anyone living in a community, is heritage something is the number one answer? And it's rarely even in the top 3 answers. Number 1 is usually jobs. Number 2 is either electricity or water. And number 3 is the other one of those. These are the kinds of things that are critical to communities and quite frankly necessary before they can bring the kind of focus on heritage that we would like to see from them. We need to design programs that meet these needs and objectives. And if your own objectives are different than those of the community you're serving, which they normally are, you need to figure out how to achieve them while at the same time prioritizing the goals of the community. If you want to achieve the SDGs, if you simply want to achieve your heritage goals, it's not necessary, but then stop please talking about purporting to meet heritage goals without ever SDG goals without ever actually doing it. You need to have measurable goals to see if these objectives are met. And you also need to actually have a budget so that you know what it costs to achieve them. You then need to go back to people and ask if the program has met their objectives, not just with quantitative, but with qualitative data, and not just when you finish the program, which is usually a wonderful halo followed by a party, followed by great happiness, but a year later and even 3 years later, so I suspect sometimes you would find a very, very different result. And finally, you have to let these participants be the advocates for the program. When you have a successful program, as I'm going to do in a moment here, let them speak about what the results are. Let them speak about what they learned and let them speak about why it's important rather than doing that yourself. So I wanted you to hear from one of the entrepreneurs. She'll introduce herself, who was a successful graduate of the program that we put together around the site, heritage site of Pachacamac, a miniature business school. You'll hear the words Escala, that is the business school, and you see it in my virtual background. I go everywhere with it. And let's see what was important to her from the program that greatly strengthened both the community and the heritage.
Hola, soy Marlene. Mi empresa se llama Muebles Educativos Chiquinova. Estamos muy contentos por las capacitaciones que nos ha venido dando la escuela Escala. Gracias a la señorita Alejandra, la señorita Cintia. Ahora estamos tratando de llevar a cabo todo el aprendizaje que nos han dado, como cómo gestionar una empresa. Nos han enseñado a cómo ser un buen empresario. Hemos también conocido el mundo de las finanzas. Hemos perdido el miedo a los números, ¿no? Que muchos tenemos ese miedo a los números. He aprendido personalmente a diferenciar las finanzas personales con las finanzas de la empresa, que eso nos ayuda bastante, ¿no? A tener un calendario donde podemos también programar día a día todas nuestras tareas. Luego también lo que nos ha gustado personalmente a mí es aprender a hacer un elevador, el mensaje del elevador. Acá yo lo tengo como recuerdo, mi mensaje del elevador. Para tenerlo claro, tiene que ser sencillo y poder convencer a todos nuestros clientes. Gracias a todas estas capacitaciones, mi empresa ha podido crecer.
If you don't think that those are important and critical accomplishments to achieving Goal 5 and the other goals I set forth before, then you don't understand what those goals are about. Heritage can do that for people. Now, you may be thinking, well, she didn't mention heritage once. And as I said, that's pretty typical. But let's hear from the head of the Pachacamac site, Dr. Denise Potsi-Escot, who I think many of you know, and who should be speaking at every one of these conferences that you have, because no one in my mind has done better community-based projects that actually have achieved SDG goals. And working with Denise, we created a cooperative there called CSON. And I just want you to hear from Denise talking about what the impact of that program is on her heritage site, the heritage site, and the community around it.
El Museo de Sitio, a través de SPI, les propuso una serie de capacitaciones, una serie de posibilidades de abrirse a lo que es el mundo actual hoy día. Está María con nosotros. Con María tenemos sueños comunes.
For now. As Denise will tell you in that video, and if you talk to her and have her speak, community relations have never been better. Looting has stopped, site invasions have stopped, and these kinds of programs have opened up a whole range of potential collaborations between the site and the communities, all of which have gone a long way toward achieving sustainable development goals in that region. Now, the second point that I made is the importance of including experts from other fields. Our board members, for example, are archaeologists, they're diplomats, they're business people, they're reporters, they're sustainability experts, entrepreneurs, documentary filmmakers, business school professors, a broad range of relevant skills. And our informal advisory board has even more diverse skills. Heritage is only one of the necessary and relevant skills, and probably not the most relevant to achieving most of the goals other than perhaps 11.4 set forth in the Sustainable Development Goals. If you are not bringing all of this knowledge to bear, you have little opportunity of either creating, documenting, or persuading someone else that you have created a program that's worth duplicating and increasing the budget for and expanding and scaling throughout your country, throughout the world in order to save heritage everywhere. Sorry. Speak the language of others. I put this tweet up a few times, and I don't want to do it to make fun of Andrew, but it's really the best example of when you don't understand or speak the language of the people to whom you are talking or trying to persuade, you have no chance of succeeding. We all know Andrew, Marcy, all of these climate heritage people, they work incredibly hard. But this is diplomatic language. It's a polite equivalent of you have nothing to say, why are you here? And I know a lot of people think I'm a harsh critic, so I actually went to friends at the Council of Foreign Relations, where I'm a member, and I said, just take a look at this tweet and interpret what that means to me diplomatically. And none of the responses were things that I would really want to repeat here, because it just said the people who came to the meeting failed dismally and didn't persuade anyone that they were even relevant to further discussions. Climate science, economic science speak an entirely different language. Many of us are anthropologists and we understand the importance of that. And yet when we go to speak to other policymakers, we speak heritage and we speak archaeology. And that's not a language that for the most part policymakers speak or are interested in speaking. And when you don't make the case, in this case to climate people, you get results like this, which make it impossible for people to understand, much less adopt what you're talking about. Everyone can agree with the platitude that culture is important to solutions. No one disagrees with that. But what does that mean? How do you implement it? What will be the result of that? Why will the project be better and how much better? These are the things that don't seem to enter very frequently into our practice. And most importantly, perhaps, use data, particularly quantitative data. Data is the voice of those we're trying to benefit, and it's the language of those who we must convince. To do projects without objectives, measures, data, and actual results leaves you little chance for the voices of the people who are trying to benefit to be heard, because we don't know, and we can't tell anyone else how we are helping them, how they're getting better, or what, for that matter, what isn't working for them, what they hate, what the failure is. There is no shame in a failed project so long as you don't repeat the failure over and over again, which I would argue is frequently what transpires in heritage practice. So at that CSON project that I just showed you, you can see the sales figures for the 24 people who are participants in that project. And we spent that project was a little bit over $50,000. I can't tell you how many times I look at heritage projects that can't tell me the results, the budget, or the number of participants. The recent policy guidance document, which would be wonderful for a long other chat, has a slew of case studies, and there's not a number that I saw in any of them. So I don't know how to evaluate. A case study is supposed to persuade someone, at least in other fields, that something is worth doing. Well, if you don't know the number of people participating, the budget, and the results, I don't know how anyone is supposed to evaluate that and say, I want to do more of these. This kind of quantitative data needs to be critical to any kind of project, and it needs to be something that's included in your budget, and you need to go back and do it again. Now, people in our school, we collect data on all of these metrics, and I won't read them to you. If you want the slide, Gabe can give it to you, or contact me and I can get to you. But this is telling us that whether or not the business skills that we are trying to impart to folks are actually getting through to them. Because we all know that some people at least want to please, and they'll say, yes, I'm learning everything, it's great. And we use two methods. One is quizzes, and one is we ask them, are you doing a whole set of things like that? So let me present the kind of results, a few of the results from these metrics, because these are the kind of things that when we go and talk to funding sources, when we go and talk at conferences that don't involve heritage, really resonate powerfully with people. 100% of the participants say they improved the way they managed. 84% improved their business and personal finances. The third one seems like minutiae, but it's actually in the economic literature. The third and the fourth one are both critically important. 85% are calculating fixed costs as compared to 10% before, and more than 70% of the participants in our program manage their business and personal finances separately, whereas earlier none did. These are extraordinarily important metrics for business success. We also were able to work with people to adapt for COVID. We've always had resiliency in the program, but now it's emphasized. 77% of the students started using online sales platforms and accepting digital payments during the pandemic. I didn't show you the part of the video where Marlene, who was speaking earlier, talks about how her Facebook page has improved her sales. And I'm sorry, I seem to have forgotten to include the link to her store, but I'm happy to do that. 53% began offering delivery service to adapt to the local quarantine conditions. Textile workers adapted to mask making. Ceramicists started making soap dishes, and none of the businesses went under. They're all suffering, don't get me wrong, but none went under. This is the kind of data, this is the only way that I know to decide whether what we're doing is worthwhile. Because if the data is terrible, why spend the money on that? You'd be better off taking your budget and handing it to the community itself, because believe me, they will spend it better than you ever will. So in conclusion, let me just say that we took a heritage program and moved it into the mainstream of SDG goal achievement, and we demonstrated the resonance of culturally based solutions by understanding the needs of other stakeholders, most importantly, the women and marginalized entrepreneurs that we're trying to help, but also those who make the policy and the budgets that are critical to scaling and helping more people. This year, we plan to include over 500 people in our programs in spite of COVID. We've moved all of our programs online because of COVID in order to help us scale, and we hope we'll do over 1,000 next year. By speaking the language and utilizing the metrics of sustainable development stakeholders, others were quickly able to understand the relevance and efficacy of our program. Bringing diverse skill sets to bear was critical to that success. And I have to say in conclusion, the only way to really have a seat at the sustainable development table, which will endure to the benefit of women, poor communities, and heritage, is to follow some kind of methodology like this. Thank you all very much for your time.
Okay, so I think that was good. Larry's here to, let me stop share. Larry's here as well to provide some inputs for later, and I've seen some questions are there. And I do appreciate the kind of conversations that we're having here, because the perspective of heritage in the poor communities is really, really different from what you see in more affluent societies, right? The question of business skills is quite important, and how do we get people out of that economic dilemma before looking at heritage, before conservation needs to be addressed. I think what we can do is that have your questions, type out your questions, and then we do the discussions afterwards. And we go to Edson Cabelfin, who will be presenting first for us the LGBTQ heritage sites. Edson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gabe, for having me. Greetings from New Orleans and Louisiana in the US. I'm the Associate Dean for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the School of Architecture at Tulane University. And what I'll be presenting today is related to LGBTQ plus heritage sites as it relates to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So let me just quickly share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see you.
Great. Thank you so much. So as the theme of the International Day for Monuments and Sites, what I'll be talking about specifically and sort of the role that I'm thinking and what Gabe had also asked me to do is to become sort of like a provocateur or to instigate questions about the relationship of equity, diversity, and inclusion as it relates to similar to what Larry had been presenting related to marginalized communities. And so I'll be focusing specifically on LGBTQ plus heritage sites as it relates to sustainable development goals, and then as it also intersects with equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so my brief talk covers sort of these three large areas, and then I'll focus on the intersection of all three at the end and to really pose questions and ideas that hopefully will instigate some more conversation for the group and for others in the future. So let me just start off by just quickly talking about what are LGBTQ plus heritage sites. And so when I talk about LGBTQ plus spaces and sites, I specifically talk about spaces and sites that are used, appropriated, experienced, and or occupied by the lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer plus community. And historically, the LGBTQ plus community has been historically marginalized and oppressed by different forms and of systems. Governments, organizations, and societies. And so if we look at then LGBTQ spaces, we can then also see these spaces not just as sort of a kind of neutral container or a neutral site, but rather it sort of embodies and expresses the struggles and resistances of the LGBTQ plus community against heterosexual, patriarchal, and oppressive norms and systems. And therefore, when we extend then looking at LGBTQ spaces as becoming related to heritage sites and related to monuments and sites, we can think of these LGBTQ plus heritage sites as something that is important to the histories, lived experiences, and I think more importantly also the hopes and dreams of the LGBTQ plus community. And the reason why I also highlight not the histories, lived experiences, and as well as the hopes and dreams, because like we often think of the LGBTQ community as their stories, their histories, as something that is not either acknowledged or recognized, and therefore sometimes are hidden and or are not even included in any kind of history and discussion. So I'm just showing a couple of examples of what I mean by LGBTQ plus heritage sites, and by no means are this is an exhaustive list or a comprehensive inventory, but I would just like to highlight some of them to begin thinking about like how do we consider them, especially as they're related to the histories and lived experiences of the LGBTQ plus community. So, one of kind of like the most sort of iconic and celebrated monument is the Homo Monument in Amsterdam, which is considered the world's first public monument dedicated to the LGBTQ community, as it acknowledges and also then remembers the persecuted gay and lesbian members. This was, of course, opened in 1987 and has become sort of like a benchmark for succeeding monuments on or LGBTQ plus sites. Much later, there's also the Memorial to Persecuted Homosexuals under Nazism, which opened in Berlin. And this is a monument that specifically acknowledges and also then memorializes the homosexuals and the LGBTQ community that were killed or persecuted by the Nazis during World War II. And this was opened in 2008. But there are also other sites similar to the monument in Berlin, but there are also sites across the world that talks about the violence against the LGBTQ community. This is in New Orleans, Louisiana, where I am currently at. This was a lounge called the Upstairs Lounge in New Orleans that was burned in 1973. An arsonist started the gay bar, which then killed 32 people in this event. Before the Pulse Disco shooting in 2016, this event in New Orleans was in fact like one of the deadliest event that then killed LGBTQ members. So it's about some of these sites are about violence. There are also other sites that talk about and celebrate the achievements of the LGBTQ community. Of course, some of them are also related to violence. Still, the Stonewall Inn, the highly celebrated gay bar also in New York, was the site of the riots in 1969 that then led to the beginning of the gay rights movement. So it's a national landmark. It's designated as a national landmark by the National Park Service here in the U.S. In a similar fashion, in Puerto Rico, for example, the Edificio Comunidad de Orgullo Gay de Puerto Rico is also another sort of recognized landmark. This was the meeting hall for the first LGBTQ organization in Puerto Rico that was established in 1974. So it's another sort of important site to kind of acknowledge the history of the community. But there are also other sites across the world also that may not necessarily fit in those categories. similar to kind of the categories of maybe celebrated events or celebrated histories. But there are also some of them might be everyday occurrences. This is the Quezon Memorial Circle. This is a large roundabout in the center of Quezon City, the former capital city of the Philippines. And I've studied this area before, and I've written about how this large monument, but then there's also a public park around it, has become a site for encounters between gay men, similar to how Central Park in New York City has been used, for example, in the 1920s and the 1930s. Encounters, the same thing had happened here. So despite this being a monument for the former president, Manuel Quezon, it's being used in a different way by the LGBTQ community. And so that kind of like also then presents the type of events and histories and stories that may not necessarily register, but still are important components of that of the LGBTQ community. And so what then some of these sites and histories also then highlight is that often LGBTQ identities are often seen as the other, usually an outsider, and are often rendered invisible and are also then excluded. So their stories, their histories are excluded. Their stories are either not even acknowledged. And that's something that then the LGBTQ community is continually fighting and struggling to be recognized and to be acknowledged by every sort of facet in the community. But we also then kind of acknowledge and then realize that LGBTQ spaces, in fact, contribute significantly to the value, to the legacy, and the sense of place in our societies and world. And therefore, we need to kind of begin to reconsider what the role of these spaces as it acts and as it sort of participates in our experiences in our cities, in our towns, and so on. So I'm kind of like shifting now to just talk a little bit about the SDGs to set up also specifically looking at gender equality and what if we include LGBTQ rights related to gender equality and really specifically, of course, to goal number 5, which aims to empower girls and women to achieve equal rights. One thing that then we kind of look at this goal number 5 is that then it primarily focuses on women and girls. And my argument then, and something to think about, is that then, is there a way for us to begin to think about goal number 5 and gender equality to really expand other types of genders, not just related to women and girls? And so the idea that then if we begin to expand our idea of equal rights, of gender, of equal gender rights, that it's also actually for everyone, then it's something that we begin to rethink about how then these rights would then look like, and what would then our heritage sites also eventually look like. So, but I also wanted to argue that equal rights for everyone is not necessarily a zero-sum game, as others argue, and also others sort of criticize some of these gay rights movements and the LGBTQ sort of movement. But I want to argue that providing rights to marginalized groups does not take away rights from other groups. Again, because it is not a zero-sum game. So then what does this mean when we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion? As the theme of inclusiveness and diversity for the International Day for Monuments and Sites, I wanted to also then link the idea of equity, diversity, inclusion related to these heritage sites. But let me just briefly kind of define what I mean by equity, diversity, and inclusion. By equity, I talk about the state or the quality or ideal of being just, impartial, and fair. When I talk about diversity, I talk about acknowledging the differences among social groups such as ethnic heritage, class, age, gender, sexuality, ability, religion, and nationality. And then when I talk about inclusion, I talk about inclusion as not only celebrating differences, but actually also accepting and embedding them. So these three ideas of equity, diversity, inclusion are all interconnected. They do not necessarily live by itself, but rather they are also sort of mutually informing each other. And so then if we take those ideas of equity, diversity, and inclusion, we can then begin to kind of think about then how can we achieve equity, diversity, and inclusion in heritage practices. And again, to sort of to begin the conversation, when I say equity, diversity, and inclusion in heritage practice, we can mean how is it that then we acknowledge the differences and that then we allow all voices to be heard. So this is also very similar to what Larry had said earlier about allowing really the marginalized groups to be able to express their own voice and to be able to really express then their sort of participation and their stories, especially stories that we don't normally hear or that stories that we ignore or we exclude. So we not only acknowledge the differences, we acknowledge that there are different stories, but we also allow these voices to be heard and to be included. Another point related to equity, diversity, inclusion in heritage practice, and by this I mean also that we allow everyone to contribute to the creation and practice of intangible and tangible cultural heritage. So this also embodies the idea of co-creation, that it's not just a certain narrow group of people then defining what is cultural heritage, but rather allowing different members of society, allowing everyone to be able to then define and also create these intangible and tangible cultural heritage. So that's a sort of a broad also sort of idea in relation to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And therefore, when we look at the SDGs as it relates to equity, diversity, and inclusion, then we can begin to argue that then maybe the SDG goal number 5 needs to be expanded. And therefore, we need to maybe look at different and other members of the marginalized communities that may not have had that opportunity to be heard and to be included and to be asked to participate, to also then be included and then be asked to participate and co-create these heritage practices. And the overall goal, to kind of end my discussion and sort of like my provocation, is that then we're all aiming towards a future that is just, fair, diverse, inclusive, and sustainable for all. So I'm not necessarily providing very specific directions, and I think because my goal is to provide provocations and then maybe provide and allow us to think about more questions about as we look at heritage sites and heritage practices, we can begin to think about them. How can we make this achieve a more just, fair, diverse, inclusive, and sustainable future? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Edson. I think that is also a very, very good presentation. There is indeed that kind of conversation that is thinking about inclusion, but also there are some spaces or the LGBT community wants to be kept hidden, right? There is that kind of nuances that is, what do you want to share? As you pointed out, I mean, my question here, what are the stories to tell and what are the stories that are left to be hidden, right? I think we have, for me at least, there's a lot of thoughts in my mind, but I've seen a couple of questions come in. So if you want, everyone, this is now the time to discuss and brainstorm ideas. I can give the floor to those people who has asked questions, and then we can start off with that. So, Larry, are you around?
Yeah. I am here.
Yeah, very good. So there was a question on qualitative and quantitative data. which is asked by Becke, right? Becke, do you want to ask your questions in terms of numbers? Is it only numbers that are important, or qualitative data are also quite important? Becke, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, actually, I was just putting it as a comment when he was speaking, because it seemed like he was limiting everything to data. If there are no numbers, there's no way we can evaluate. And I was saying, quant is just one way of evaluating things. Qualitative data is also very important in evaluating things. So that was just a comment. Yeah.
Larry, how do you, because what you've provided is more of the results, let's say, how many people have learned things, how many people have achieved things. For you, how do you use qualitative data in your practice?
Well, I started with the 2 videos, and I was sort of tempted to play nothing but, because those are pieces of qualitative data, obviously. But I would say that in SDG world, presentations that are devoid of quantitative data rarely travel very far. So we could have a long debate about qualitative versus quantitative data. We utilize both, obviously. But if you want to go into SDG world, if you want to go into climate world, and you don't want to talk about tons of carbon being removed from the system, if you want to go into economic development world and can't talk about how many jobs you're going to create and what kinds of revenues you're going to generate, all the qualitative data in the world is not, I don't think, going to persuade policymakers. So I think you need to definitely use both. And I think Heritage World has a tendency, perhaps because of its roots in anthropology and ethnography and a whole slew of other historical reasons, to tend toward qualitative data. The other is quantitative data generally needs to be collected over extended periods of time. So as you saw in the CSON case that I put up, we have data back to 1914, which means we have to spend time and money going back to collect it every year. So I think there are a lot of ways to tell stories and to evaluate things, but again, it depends on your audience and speaking the language of others.
Correct. There was another question on data, actually, which is from Brittany. So are these the numbers that you provided? Are they what has happened after COVID? And then is there any, what are means of making these projects more resilient? Brittany, do you want to elaborate on your question? Oh, is she still around? But I guess I can ask that question to Larry. Is there any new data that have been produced with COVID?
Some of the data that I put up on that last slide, I saw when her question came in and I was sort of laughing, but the next slide, of course, was the COVID slide that I discussed. Sales revenue and revenue numbers are down. And one of the things we've been discussing with some of the stakeholders in other places, because this is crossing a slew of industries, is what is normal data for the COVID era? Every tourism business in the world is down 70%, 88%, 95%. So it's hard, everyone's graphs are going to show a decline and hopefully rise back up as the world begins to reopen. So we certainly have collected that data. The sales data is probably down for the CSON ladies, roughly 70%. I think it's starting to climb a bit out of the trough as Pachacamac has reopened in the last couple of weeks. We did help make adaptations for online sales, delivery services, etc. And part of our curriculum has always been these kinds of adaptations. We may have been a bit more specific with suggestions given the nature of the crisis.
Any questions so far? Because I have some questions for Larry, but I want to ask some questions for Edson as well. Anyone who wants to ask any particular questions to Larry?
Can I ask one?
Yeah, sure, please. Yeah,
really for both speakers. One, both very fascinating. When you're talking about collecting data, how do you collect data when the issue is so sensitive and people feel repressed? I think that that's an issue that I constantly find, is that when people collect data, it's often easy to collect data rather than the actual getting to the root of the issue or actually dealing with that. How in your experiences have you approached it? Because I have a student who is covering both issues right now, and actually how do you collect data where it can be seen as quite as sensitive, either culturally or I suppose culturally or societal ways, a difficult data to collect or even respond to? It's maybe an open question there.
Yeah. Edson and Larry? Yeah.
I mean, I would say that I think we've done it primarily by creating a sense of community and interaction among the people who've participated in the programs, explaining its importance and how by providing that data, they're enabling other people to be able to participate in the program going forward, both from the funding point of view, and we explain that rather explicitly, but also to enable other people similarly situated to participate. It doesn't mean that we get 100% participation from the data people, and we collect it in a variety of ways, some of which enable people to make, a lot of the data, for example, that I presented with respect to the percentage of people who are doing personal finance, that those people can remain anonymous if they choose to. So we try to collect data both anonymously and with names attached in a variety of different ways. It requires a commitment of time and resources that prioritizes data collection.
Edson, do you have some thought? I think this is for more sensitive places, for more sensitive people. How do you actually derive data?
Yes, I think that is definitely an important consideration, and I think similar to also what Larry had also said, a lot of the work that I've done before is that you have to gain the trust also of your participants in collecting data. You have to be very honest with them how you're going to use the data and how it's going to be disseminated. It should be upfront. You cannot sort of hide it from them. And then the other one is guaranteeing their privacy, especially for a lot of, let's say, with the LGBTQ plus community. Some of them might not want to be exposed, again, because of fear of being persecuted, fear of maybe losing their jobs and others. That is something that then you have to then either, if let's say it's qualitative and you're able to, let's say, derive, let's say, some of the information and then kind of share that as direct quotes, you provide pseudonyms. So you kind of need to hide some of those identities. The idea is that then you give your participants the choice whether they want to be identified or not, and that then you allow them to protect, and it's your duty then as a researcher to then protect their identity. If it's a larger pool of information or data, you can aggregate the data, so therefore it's not necessarily identifying very specific ones. And then if you do need to identify specific participants, then you maybe hide their identities. But it's very particularly challenging also, especially if some of the participants do not want to reveal their identities. And you have to respect that. You have to also ensure their privacy.
Yeah, so thanks for that, because that's the exact issue that I'm dealing with now. We're trying to preserve a site of someone who was at the leading front of HIV awareness in the UK. And again, we are facing those kind of similar issues with the research. So thanks for that. That's really useful. And again, thanks to Larry as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll take some notes, and if you don't mind, I'll share those with my PhD student to hopefully thing. But it's fascinating talk from both of you. Thank you very much.
One thing that I want to comment for Edson and getting of data, I realized, I Googled before that there was a national survey in the UK which actually identifies the number of LGBT people in the UK. There was a survey, and I can send a link to everyone. But I thought that was, I don't know how the data was collected, because as you said, there will be potentials of people not declaring their status, and then, it's like a state of mind. It's not like you say you're a male versus female, or you have to identify all the different layers of sexual identities that are attached to gender identity. So it will be quite interesting how they derived that kind of survey that was done.
Well, actually, interestingly, that in the UK is that, one of the big movements that we've had is also people not having to identify themselves. We have a new pseudonym that we automatically applied, like for students. Instead of Mr. or Mrs., they can have MX in front of their name. And people can choose not to be identified. And this is for not just, people think, it's for people of transgender. I think people are one of the great movements now, particularly with the most recent undergraduates. I would say that's that that of students is they don't want to be identified as one group. They want that because they see themselves as one community. And I think that's quite an interesting shift that we're seeing in that movement. And as well, people are saying, because you then can't discriminate against me on paper. And I think that was quite a shocking, I think, for a lot of people, that they chose to do that because they did not want to be discriminated against. And that was their driver. And I think that's what shocked people. And it does. And we collect that data as well, Gabriel, in our UK census, which has just finished. You can declare it on your census, which is, I think, we're one of the few countries that has always collected that data, which has made it, when I say always, most recently been collecting it at a national and mandatory level, which is quite unusual, I think.
I think, James, to relate to that, then I think what you also then maybe point that's also important is that then it's providing agency. It's giving the students, the community, whoever, the opportunity to identify themselves rather than being labeled by somebody else. I think that's the key difference, right? That it's giving the students that ability to be able to identify themselves, what they want to be called or what they want to be labeled as. And I think because that has been the struggle of the LGBTQ community for so long, is that then the oppression partly is coming from how society, other constructs sort of then determine that, okay, this is who you are, but identity is sort of like a personal issue, and that means then it's about like allowing themselves to be able to identify for themselves like what they want to be identified. And I think that's kind of like one of the key difference maybe that has been going on in the recent decade or so.
I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, the example I can think of is a group of students who all changed their first title as a group because one of their friends was subject to discrimination. So they all, as a community, as a group of individuals, said, no, if one of us is going to be discriminated, we're going to all group together, and they all changed their title to MX as a kind of almost a communal act of, as defiance is not the right word, as supportive action. And I think that was what was interesting. And I thought that was very strong in the sense of we've seen that movement because, they weren't what we would traditionally, or what we have, I suppose, diversity terms would have intended that title to be used for, but they've actually now using it as a community of support. And I think that's what's quite positive to see in that movement, and let's hope that we stay in that positive direction. Yeah.
One thing that I just want to comment for Edson's presentation is many of the sites that have been put out there are sites of violence or commemoration of violence, right? That the whole act of removal or like a persecution was the starting point of that kind of memorial, which I hope that it is not just the stories that are told for the gay community, right? The LGBTQ plus community. What I thought that one of the good spaces was the Berlin one, which I remember it is situated right beside the Holocaust Memorial, which is just across it, and it somehow links that whole story of the Holocaust with millions and millions of people with a small commemoration of a certain type of people that, and it is the same story but told in a very dedicated way. So I thought that was quite sensitively done and quite a poignant way of creating a heritage site on a particular focus.
And I think, Gabe, on that note, also, talking about violence and persecution, I think like what I'm also maybe looking forward to maybe in the future is that we're not only just commemorating violence, that maybe there are some monuments or that when we look at some of these heritage sites or heritage practices, that it's about the joys and the hopes and the dreams, right? Because then that you're allowing the communities, to be able to celebrate rather than just commemorate the persecution and the violence. And I understand that's like it's an important beginning point, but I think like we hopefully, and again, that's my hope also, right? That then the hopes and the dreams of the LGBTQ community can also be then acknowledged and be recognized, that they also have dreams and aspirations, right? As in any other marginalized group, right? That they also need to be celebrated and be allowed to dream and also to aspire.
Yeah. So that leads to that one thought that I had, which is in the future, perhaps studies of festivals, the Mardi Gras festival, Pride walks will be added on to this kind of intangible heritage of a city, to create those memorable places that are celebrations of vibrancy of the cities. I know that we need to move forward, but I just have one question for Larry before we continue. Is with regards to the silos that you've highlighted and the very, very narrow perspectives that a lot of colleagues of ours are maybe be trapped in. How do you think that heritage practitioners can be more relevant to the bigger issues that are faced by everyone?
I think we have a lot of natural allies. We just need to reach out to them. I think people need to put what they're working on in front of people from other disciplines and get their comments. It doesn't mean you have to accept them all, but if a climate person looks at it and says, no one in climate will read this because it doesn't have the following data, you should at least be able to take that into account. Similarly for economists, I've generally found that people are more than happy. Everyone loves heritage. People are happy to help with the projects, but if they don't get asked, it doesn't happen. So from my perspective, most people are affiliated with universities or some organization where they can at least put a little, what I call a kitchen cabinet together, a group of informal advisors and say, hey, take a look at this and tell me what it would take for it to be persuasive in your community. I remember once the Neubauer colloquium had one of the economics and law professors come over and critique some of the heritage proposals. And I think it infuriated the heritage people, but the insight was quite extraordinary. And for those who took it, I think quite helpful. But I think it also requires an openness to being criticized and having to rethink the way practice has taken place over the years.
Indeed. And then I think what you said also about failures, our own failures will be the key to the future success, right? So never be afraid of declaring those. failures of research or failures of the case studies that we have done. Okay. Thank you very much for our two wonderful presentations. What I would suggest that we do, and we can still talk in the chat, and then if you want to have these conversations, we can have it again. But I do also want to allow the time for our national committees and ISCs to share their perspectives on heritage and sustainability in their context. So we have our first presentation from Olympia in Iscarsa, Olympia, Ivan, and Sola, who will be sharing what their perspectives are for Iscarsa and SDGs. I will share that screen so that you can see it. Yeah. Oops. Wait. Hold on. Full screen. Can you see that? Yeah. Okay. The floor is yours, Olympia. I know.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you 3 different experiences from Russian, Nigerian, Colombia, and Japan from ISCARC members. Our project has been reanalyzed with respect of the points of United Nations 2030 agenda. And now we are delighted to share them with you. For this reason, I invite Ivan to start his interesting project in Russia. And after Sola follows with the important experience in Nigeria. And I close this presentation with the 2 experiences between Colombia and Japan. Please, Ivan. Thank you.
Hello to everybody. I want to tell about 2 historic sites that I love the best among thousands, not thousands, but hundreds of similar historic sites that I do in Russia and 1 in India. This is a site in the north of the country. It is a small island. It's called Spas-Kameny. Kamen means stone. This was a small church, and during the revolution in 1917, it was destroyed. It was destroyed. Nevertheless, the main cathedral, Transfiguration Cathedral, was the oldest one in the very big district in the north. The belfry suffered much, but it was left like a thing that will help sailors and fishermen to find their ways. The lake is very big. It's about 50 kilometers long and 10 kilometers wide. And the island itself is very small. It's about 200 meters long and 90 meters wide. All the dimensions are very approximate because it depends on the level of the water. So when we came, we saw remains of the belfry. The belfry itself was a church too. There is a kind of this bell and belfry and church. It's a part of Russian tradition. So what we've seen when we came there, the lower part of the church was damaged very badly. The shock of the blast was so strong that it destroyed lower vault completely and destroyed all the vaulted arches of openings, doors openings and window openings. So when we had an idea to restore the vault. And to make it, we had to reconstruct the belt that was inside the wall. Originally, these belts were from timber, but by that time, the timber rotten completely, and we could, next. And we had to replace it with reinforced concrete details. This is the part where the lower vault was made. After that, we restored the vault and repaired the walls, fixing the cracks with grouting, and especially invented for this reinforcement. It was so-called grouting with reinforcement. It's a very interesting thing. It helps to make the construction more stable and to compensate the lack of integrity of masonry in big cracks. So after that, we made a more mild and more traditional reinforcement of the belt on the next tier. It was done in a more simple manner, more traditional manner, by the steel belt that was tightened with bolts and nuts. And during this work, it was heated with gas heaters, and after it became normal temperature, it was very tightly done. After that, it was hidden under the brickwork, under the surface brickwork. Then we restored all other parts, including the bell tier, and it's only a few glimpses of the story that I usually talk to my students, and it usually take about 40-45 minutes. Next. Another part of my work, it is now under the process, is ancient church, about 11th or 20th century church in Northern Ossetia. It is a very unusual example of indirect influence of seismic activity. Why indirect? Because due to earthquakes that are often there, the river that flows at the bottom of the hill on which this church stands. The church, this place is about 2,200 meters over the sea level, but this hill is about 35 meters. It's made of stone gravel, mostly. But due to the changing of the flow, the hill was washed away partly, and also partly the part of the church was also had fallen down with the landslide. First part of the works took place about 12 years ago. I was much younger there and more optimist. We hoped that hydrotechnical hydrotechnics engineers will help us to restore the hill, first of all, because what we did was only emergency conservation works, no more. We put a belt to make the thing as one whole. We injected a few cracks that we've seen there, and we put a kind of blanket on the slope of this damaged part of the hill in order to minimize the effect of atmospheric waters. We hoped that 1 or 2 or maybe 3 years it will work. And after that, we expected that other works of reconstructing the hill will begin, but they did not begin until now. Now there is something is going on, and soon I am going there to control the process. We are promised to make a new restored river flow with good protective shores on the both sides, and to make the hill as it was. And after that, there were different proposals. One of the proposals was after reconstructing the hill, leave the structure as it is, reinforce it, and show it to tourists and to local people. But local people told them that it was too dear for their hearts, and their ancestors live there, so they visit this place several times a year, made little traditional feasts, and they wanted it as a whole. So it makes our work more difficult, and in a way not so obviously good, but the task is given, so we must do it. So that's all. If you have question, I'm ready to answer it. Here's the picture that shows the people who traditionally gather there, drink local wine, eat local goats and sheep, and make toasts for God Almighty and for their ancestors. And their religion is Christianity, is Orthodox Christianity, but with with some influence of traditional Christian rites. So all these beliefs are combined very much. So their rituals, their religious rituals, they often end with great feast. And by the way, almost each feast where I took part in, they were sounding like a sermon, like a religious sermon too. So that's how it's proposed to look like. So the original part will have different color. All original stones will be saved as it is. The roof is very easily calculated, its dimensions, its height, and also it's very easily to do with the missing part. So maybe next time I will tell you how it all work out. I hope so. I'm ready for questions if there are.
Sola. Thank you, Ivan.
Okay, I go next. Okay, thank you, Ivan. Yeah, thank you, Gabe. So I was going to give like a brief introduction to like an overview of the projects I'll be showing, and I think it was really nice that I heard Larry's presentation, because it's kind of it was a necessary thing for me to hear, because it kind of drove home the ideals and concepts I've had to work with in Nigeria specifically. And essentially, if your project, your cultural heritage project, doesn't have any quantitative benefits or quantitative outputs, results, or whatever, you just, are not going to get any support or any traction from anybody, from people volunteering, from the end users, from government support, private sector. Nobody's going to help you if it doesn't in any way, impact tangibly, and economically on the surrounding. Because for us, there's a lot we're dealing with. One, the fact that bulk of what is left as heritage is actually colonial heritage. So I get a lot of comments, telling me, oh, why are you doing this? This is not African heritage. This is not Nigerian heritage. And I tell them that this is just a means to an end. I have to give an excuse to say, we're learning the principles, and we hope to carry it on and try to restore some of our pre-colonial cultural heritage sites and practices and all of that. And then as well, cultural heritage is not anywhere near the top of the priorities for a government like Nigeria, because there's health. I think Gabe mentioned earlier, there's the fact that you need to get food, you need to get health, you need to get, sustenance, general basic needs. So cultural heritage is essentially a luxury, really. It's this artistic, foreign, thing that people do. And so we had to find a middle ground where all of this work impacted people on ground. So right here, the image I have here, or the collage I have here on the bottom left, for us was strongly about education. So we opened up the museum to school visits, specifically focused on children, primary school children. And, they just love it, because what happens is, essentially we're located in the Railway Museum, and, in the Railway Museum is located in the railway compound. And so what happens is the railway takes them on a short trip for them to experience the trains that don't really run much, but are coming back now in Nigeria. And after the trip, the bus brings them to the museum, and they have a full day experience of things where they have to write notes, learn as part of their coursework. And, it's really impactful, because I think in terms of data, at a point, after working on this for about 5-6 years, we stopped someday when we were preparing a proposal to a potential funder, and they asked us for data. And then we had to go back and look at our register. And at the end of the day, we realized that we hosted about 120,000 children in a year. And that is huge, because, even regular or contemporary museums and galleries don't do such numbers. So it was really good for us to go into the data aspect of things and get out that information. And as you see at the bottom left, I also wrote that we've kind of created multiplicity in terms of the functions of the space, because originally, the man who restored the building, my former professor in Unilag, John Godwin, restored the building, and they put a museum in there because that was the mandate. But the museum wasn't able to sustain itself. Nobody used to come to the museum, and you couldn't charge more than what the national museums, which were being subsidized by government, were charging. And so we had to create what I'll call a financial sustainability plan. And essentially that for us was about developing the grounds. This house was the house of the general manager of the railways, was built in 1898. And the guy was getting paid higher than the governor general of the colony, because he was the business head of the colony. And, the grounds were built to fit. So he has large grounds, and we got to work. All of us, by the way, were all volunteers, and we came, started digging, shoveling, and all of that. And if you look at the picture on the bottom right, the expatriates, because there's a lot of expatriates in Lagos, you know, working in the oil sector, in hospitality, all kinds of things. Once they saw our call out on Instagram and on Facebook, they all came, because Lagos is, you know, as you all probably have the impression, is unsafe. But we had this incubated and safe space that was a cultural heritage space. And most of these guys, I think about 2 of them, are British, and they're coming back to a British house, you know, to work. And so we had a lot of them expatriates coming on board. And before you knew it, we had the garden up and running. And the garden just attracted all the Nigerian people, because they then came for photo shoots, for music video shoots, for movie shoots, for weddings, parties, picnics, all kinds of things. And what we have now is a space, or 2 spaces that basically complement each other, because people who then come for events ask us, oh, what is happening in there? And we tell them it's a museum, and then they pay to see the museum. So I think just to go over the 4 tiles that I put at the top, yeah, good health and well-being. We, in Lagos, you know, people who know Lagos here, all the trees are taken down. You know, you have just hardscape everywhere, tall buildings, hard concrete floors, coal tar roads and everything. So this, you know, represent like a safe haven for people who did the hustle and bustle of Lagos, who still do that. And on the weekends or after work, they then come here for a museum tour. And we find that people don't want to leave. In fact, we had to start charging like an extra fee for you if you want to sit down at the garden for about an hour or 2 after your museum tour. And people pay because, you know, they can't find this elsewhere. And then the quality of education, of course, like the kids have shown, you know, at a point history was taken out of the curriculum, you know, for all kinds of political reasons. But they always got a good dose of history here, because we also had things that were not just related to the railways and artifacts and pictures and all of that. Sustainable cities and communities. The immediate environment of this place was greatly impacted by the work we did, because anytime we hosted an event, we just got all the market women selling things around to come into the space, and they became our vendors for free. And they made more money because more people, you know, they had a larger target market than they typically would. Partnerships for the goals. When we started, you can go to the next slide, Gabe. When we started the Legacy project or the Jekyll House project, we definitely did not have any money at all. All we had were the sites that were given to us by the Railway Corporation in their 100th year. So we were like a centenary anniversary declaration of protection of 4 sites. And so in the beginning, we just used to have partners come, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that. And we said, you know what, don't give us any money. Just use the space for free, clean it up, pay for utilities, and promote the site. So at the beginning, we had to develop a foundation on partnerships. You know, so till today, we still do that. And this next slide is another building in the railway compound. It's actually the main museum. It's where the steam engines used to get repaired, and they just wheeled in from wherever or towed in. And if you can see in the middle right bottom corner, there's a steam engine still there that, you know, we hope to restore, and we're very close to that, but it's been a lot of work. And essentially we have 4 steam engines in there, just sitting there, no protection at all. In fact, we have squatters living in there, and we've had to come up with a, well, I say, partnership scheme with them where they live there and they clean up the place and keep it, you know, nice and tidy. What we had to do, like I said earlier, was to partner with all kinds of institutions. On the bottom left, the picture with the fabric things up on the roof, that was done by some students of the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. They came to do like a workshop session, spent 2 weeks in the museum Jekyll House and working from here. The next slide on the bottom with the food train thing was this whiskey brand, Jameson. They came to do an event in this huge space, and they used one of the old coaches for vendors who were selling food because, you know, the ergonomics worked really well. The same event is at the picture, the night scene on the top right, where you have like a crowd of people who are just, you know, having fun in this cultural heritage space, you know, very bad shape, but the frame structure is solid and has been solid for about 120 years. And it was a good time. You know, I was in the front there somewhere myself, but it was a good way for young people who are totally disconnected from this colonial heritage building to engage with this space. And, you know, all sorts of benefits came out of that. The green web-like thing on the bottom is also one of the results of the interventions by the students from Austria. And all of these gave us, you know, good marketing leverage, because all the people who came for these events, you know, came to bring new events that got us money. Next slide, please, Gabe. I think I have one last slide.
Sola,
okay, yeah.
Sola, sorry, you have only 1 minute.
Yeah, so this is not even my project, but I needed to show it because this is a colleague from Togo. The old colonial palace of Togo has been converted now by the government into an arts and cultural center open to all the kids, worked on by 10 different professionals who are Togolese local professionals, and they've done a great job. So you need to Google that and find more about it. And I'll hand over to Olympia. Thank you very much.
Okay. In Japan, next, okay, thank you. In Japan, we have, in Japan at Sado Island, in collaboration with the Niigata Prefecture, we are working on an interesting project that aims to involve the local community to understand the innate of the traditional houses and the cultural landscape. Next, please. In Sado Island, we are working very much with the local community, especially a special activity for the enhancement of the rural area and the ancient mines of gold and silver. The main aims is to improve the quality of education above all the young generation, the welfare and the development of the local community. Also with the important project finalized to restore the traditional houses. Next, please. In Colombia, in these last few years, I realized many activities, academic activities, to approach the local community to the values of the cultural heritage. In these specific cases, with the University of Ibagué in Tolima department, I realized a first project to restore a railway station built in 1920 and after 1915 was abandoned. Next, please. Thanks to this project, the local community has been involved, and today this ancient railway station is an important cultural house where also with a small library and many spaces for cultural activities. And this space has been important to enhance the local cultural heritage. Next, please. In ISCARC, International Scientific Committee, the goals of Agenda 2030 were not analyzed, and this opportunity is well to start this path together and to reanalyze many important projects of our members with a new perspective. For this reason, our idea is to promote many important activities in the next few years above promotion of Agenda 2030, also to organize a specific course. For example, at my university, I'm working and I'm organizing a specific class on Agenda 2030. Also promote in meetings access to revitalizing and regenerating these procedures in according with the Agenda 2030. Thank you so much, and sorry for our delay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that was good. The different kinds of projects that you had, particularly, having education and community engagement, are really the core of that kind of sustainable development. Things that, and as Sola has said, right? If you lack money, then that's the time that creativity comes in, and then you discuss, have more partnerships and make heritage work for more people. We can have some questions for later, and then we just go to ICOMOS Philippines first and their presentation for the work that they're thinking of. Kenneth, it's time to share the slides. Yes, if you can show your face, that will be good as well. Yeah.
I'm going to turn on my camera after the presentation due to internet purposes. Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, we can see the screen. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, to all of ICOMOS members worldwide. As ICOMOS Philippines, we will be presenting our introduction as a current 3-member committee on the Sustainable Development Goals Working Group. The outline for this presentation is first, introduction of the members and presentation of their case studies. Second, we will be tackling the brief contribution of ICOMOS Philippines to the SDGs. And third, it will be the brief presentation of our 3-year plan for the working group. To start, I will introduce each member. The first member is Mrs. Chen Reyes Macias. She is a tourism and environmental planner who has been providing technical assistance to local governments, NGOs, national government agencies, and private companies on tourism planning and ecotourism development for almost 20 years. She is a graduate of tourism, environmental education, and urban and regional planning. She authored several planning tools designed to provide a more pragmatic approach to the planning process. She is also into tourism product development that capitalizes on both the natural and cultural assets of a destination. She advocates responsible travel, heritage conservation, and community-based approaches in planning. The second member and one of the emerging professionals, or PPP, is landscape architect Chris Justine Ugalino. She is part of the Philippine Association of Landscape Architects, or PALA, and is an active as the PALA Philippine Landscape Architecture Standards for Special Committee. And international level, she is also a member of International Federation of Landscape Architects, or IFLAC. She is also an environmental planner and is part of the Philippine Institute of Environmental Planners, or PIEP. And she is a certified professional and assessor for the Philippine Green Building Council, Building for Ecologically Responsive Design Excellence, or BERDE program. And lastly, yours truly, I am Kenneth Tua. I'm an architect and a sustainable territorial development consultant. I am currently finishing my Erasmus Mundus joint master degree in dynamics of cultural landscape, heritage, memory, and conflictualities, and Master of Arts in cultural diplomacy and international relations. I am also a fellow at Young Sustainable Impact Southeast Asia and an expert consultant on sustainability at Campus Erasmus Mundus Incorporation. Now we are going to proceed with our case studies and projects for the SDGs, and I will start first. Okay. For me, I've been participating in sustainable development and sustainability innovation fellowships as a scholar, contributing to the SDGs through design thinking and idea innovation for stakeholders in the public, private, NGO, and government sectors throughout Asia. 2 of those projects are directly related to cultural heritage, and 2 are indirectly related. Now, these ideations are centered on the promotion of cultural heritage and its ripple effects to socio-economic advancements. Afterwards, the turnover of projects to stakeholders are done for implementation or application to current programs and practices. The first image on the left is in Thailand, the second is in Singapore, the third is in South Korea, and the fourth is in Manila in Asian Development Bank. Now, furthermore, I've been doing information dissemination of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals with touches on cultural heritage, and by providing talks and seminars on HEIs and government agencies. This includes highlights. I would like to also highlight my work in the Pasig River Rehabilitation Commission, then, and now it's called PRCMO, for the protection of urban landscapes. And recently, I've contributed to the baseline pilot study on the first and new specialization on landscape heritage conservation education through ICOMOS Philippines in the Philippines. And next will be Ms. Ugalina and her case studies, followed by Mrs. Mencias.
Hello, everyone. So I have been a part of the science program in my academic years and have collaborated with researchers on easing dehydration of unhusked rice or rice grains with portability, availability of resources, and less cost, making use of plant fiber as an additive for bricks, and assessing native trees as replacement candidates for a campus streetscape. In my professional years, apart from supervising projects and developments, I have been contributing to my professional organizations in the publication of Philippine landscape architecture standards, which are envisioned to involve the SDGs and green developments, and in crafting guidelines for the recognition of the specific efforts of local government units with the SDGs. Can you proceed with the next slide, Ken? I've also worked on written projects such as the revitalization of a transportation hub and the promotion of an outdoor experience-based educational facility to foster out-of-school youths, and developments such as economic zones, coastal subdivisions, consultancies for coastal subdivisions for native tree selection, and information dissemination on landscape architecture, environmental planning, and green buildings or developments. Thank you.
And now next is Mrs. Chen Mencias.
Hello, good morning or good evening to everyone, wherever you are. My name is Chen Mencias, and I've been providing technical assistance to local governments for the last 20 years. And in my line of work, my responsibility is to make sure that whatever plans that we create are anchored on sustainable development principles. However, my realization is that if we go down to the level of the communities, there's no clear articulation of these specific SDG goals. And so in the last two projects that I facilitated, I made a conscious effort to articulate or explain to my clients how each of the goals are relevant to tourism development. Because my specialization is tourism development, and I am more biased towards community-based approach. And in the last 3 years, or 3 years ago rather, I had a chance to write 6 books about 6 protected areas in the province of Aurora. And it's a story about ecology, but relating the lives of Indigenous people in the equation, and how Indigenous knowledge plays a role in heritage conservation, but more particularly natural heritage. We are consciously advocating for a more clear understanding of the SDG goals with regards to tourism planning, because here in the Philippines, the national government is merely adopting economic indicators as metrics for assessing status of tourism development in destinations. So I'm embarking on a legacy project where We will be partnering with different institutions to be able to generate different indicators across different dimensions of the tourism development paradigm so that we can compute for tourism development capacity index. And so this entails a more clear understanding of the sustainable development goals. And so it will be a challenge for us to bring it down to the level of the community. But I think this is long overdue because we have seen many destinations in the country going downhill and declining because of the lack of understanding of these goals. Next slide, please. Okay. About 3 years ago, I got involved with a fishing community wherein these communities have this intangible heritage that goes all the way back to their ancestors. And this fishing community conducts this ritual, fishing ritual, every year at the start of March. And 3 years ago, they told me that they don't have the funding anymore to continue with the ritual, even though it's been going on for more than 100 years, simply because they don't have the money anymore. And because these are poor fishing communities. And so I said, because I was involved in facilitating the tourism master planning project for the entire province of Batanes, and it's a protected landscape and seascape. And so I said that there is a way to link protecting or conserving your intangible heritage with tourism. Why don't we come up with an experiential package or product where we invite limited number of tourists to witness the ritual? Because ever since they started this ritual, it's a private ritual that's not really open to the public. And so I said, maybe we can do it in a limited and controlled manner and have strict rules and protocols, at the same time generate the fund that you need to be able to continue with the ritual. And so the first year that we did that, it was really experimental, but the result was so positive that they continued doing that in the next 2 years until this year, actually. Even with the pandemic, we were able to raise enough money donated by tourists who were not there because there was no tourism, but they provided the funds so that the ritual will continue. And so I realized that there's really possible connection between tourism and heritage conservation, as long as authenticity is preserved and strict protocols are established, so that the ritual, the integrity of the rituals or any intangible heritage are preserved. So next slide, please. About in 2014, again, this is in Batanes, the same place where the Mataos live. I got involved with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources to develop the business plan, ecotourism business plan for a community of Ibatans who live in these stone houses, age-old houses that have been there for more than 100 years. And I realized that many of these people living in this community don't have the funds to maintain the houses, and some of them are already dilapidated. And so, and they don't also have the resources coming from the government. So I learned that there's no baseline as to how many houses are dilapidated and what are the status. And so, apart from my formal engagement of coming up with a business plan, I decided to venture in a personal project where I developed a tool to assess these houses in this community based on different parameters. And I translated the result of that assessment into a GIS map, as you see here on the left side. It's color-coded, and you will see that the red ones are the ones that are preserved, while the rest are in different states of dilapidation. So I think that by showing this to the national, or by showing this to the provincial government, it was an eye opener that they realized that they have to do something to be able to save this valuable heritage, which actually is the very reason why tourists are coming to Batanes. And I'm hoping later on that this kind of project can be funded so that it can be replicated in the other communities within that province. So that's it. Ken?
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Ucalino and Ms. Mencias. And now we'll be discussing the ICOMOS Philippines and the SDGs. Okay. For the past 8 years, ICOMOS Philippines has briefly touched the SDGs, and we will present projects and engagements for each SDG. Now, even though that SDG has been brought to in 2015, we know that sustainable development has been there since 1987. So this presentation is ICOMOS Philippines and Sustainable Development from 2013 to 2021. For SDG 1, ICOMOS Philippines has provided partnership on providing heritage activities and community development in local neighborhood. Here, as our partnership, we provided food and sanitary and fire prevention courses for the local neighborhood. For SDG 2, we had, and also 1, we had a webinar on placemaking and food security. And here we would like to highlight our main member engagement with Moulinet Chocolat by our member, Ms. Estela Duki, with Cablon Farmers of Barangay Bunao. For SDG 3, we had a discussion to explore collective strategies to adapt to new challenges amidst the global pandemic through the Heritage Amidst Practice Amidst COVID-19 webinar, wherein we discussed shared heritage, shared responsibility, and shared culture. For SDG 4, we have been providing seminars that have speakers both international and local in cooperation with higher education institutions. We also hosted relevant discussion on heritage by pairing ICOMOS PH members with students to present theses. Now, for this one, although it's not our project, but it is a project by our very close partner, Philippine Association of Landscape Architects, wherein our dear member, which is also here, Dr. Edson Cabalfin, had been invited to have a discussion on the series centered on Philippine queer spaces. And also today we have him honorably to present for us. And this is a place wherein ICOMOS PH will be good to to express a greater change or to recalibrate our strategies to further add more to this SDG. For SDG 6, we have been addressing issues and have been creating a platform for discourse through, again, our placemaking food security webinar, including the available information about water scarcity on local communities. Also, again, another out of ICOMOS Philippines topic, it is the highlights on member engagements through PALA, again, on the discussion using dolomites as beach nourishment strategy for the rehabilitation of Manila Bay by one of our dear members, which is landscape architect Paulo G. Alcazarin. For SDG 7, we have given talks that briefly touch the importance of green building practices to promote solar power utilization and improving energy productivity in heritage-related projects. Now, for SDG 8, we have been equipping professionals with field school programs like this, and we've been inviting notable speakers and mentors to collaborate, such as the seismic retrofit of unreinforced masonry heritage to churches in the Philippines. On the same projects, we have also SDG 9, where we recapacitate people with innovative technology, such as photogrammetry and lighting and acoustic designed for existing and historic buildings. And again, the same for SDG 10, we have been providing scholarship for outstanding aspiring heritage practitioners and thus contributing to inclusivity. For SDG 11, we have been providing CPD seminars that provides training for sustainable urban development and on-ground discourse with professionals practicing sustainability and its challenges. For SDG 12, after the food security webinar, our dear members, Mr. Caballero, Ms. Paterno, and Ms. Duque have synthesized this into a document. And also, we have highlights on member engagement through the Sustainable Sagada initiative, which is called now as Sustainable Towns, for helping fresh produce reach consumers during the COVID-19 by our member, Ms. Patricia Maria Santiago, which is also featured in CNN. For SDG 13, we also provide conferences on human security by supporting climate campaign, and in connection with that, for SDG 14, through this, we promote sustainable tourism with, of course, highlights engagements by Mrs. Chen Mencias on conserving ocean-based resources and marine protected areas. For SDG 15, we have been advocating to the protection of heritage trees and cultural landscapes, with also highlights on member engagements on tree conservation by Dr. Susan Aquino Ong. For SDG 16, we have been releasing joint statements to maintain peace in the country's cultural heritage and to create mutual understanding. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first joint statement that we released was the Rizal Memorial Sports Complex of being turned into a commercial hub. But thankfully, it was conserved, and now, if I'm not mistaken, it has been used for the Southeast Asian Games and has been properly been restored to its former glory. And for SDG 17, we have a strong cooperation with public and private stakeholders in the protection of heritage, as well as improving access to knowledge and ideas through joint projects. And one of those is the Philippine Heritage Chapter. For the international level, ICOMOS, we have contributed to the policy guidance by providing feedbacks for the second overall document consultation and have provided a case study for SDG 11, thus highlighting ICOMOS Philippine efforts. Now, since the conception of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, ICOMOS Philippines was not able to fully integrate and align its programs and activities to the 17 SDGs. Albeit the 2030 Agenda has briefly touched many of our projects throughout the years, this is an opportunity for the organization to recalibrate and prioritize further these goals, achieving a more localized approach in the protection of the Philippines' cultural and natural heritage for the SDGs. The good news with this is that we are going to present to you the 2021 to 2023 working plan for 3 years. Launch a campaign with branding of sustainable development goals for cultural and natural heritage, Pamana 2030, Pamana, which means inheritance or heritage in Filipino. Create a nationwide database for SDGs, activities and innovations centered on Philippine heritage. Anchorage and integration of the SDGs in all of ICOMOS PH projects and programs until 2030. This is for internal. And collaboration with development actors on the mobilization of Philippine heritage for SDGs for external. Writing a research on Philippine cultural tourism and the SDGs through the initiative of Ms. Mencias and Mr. Caballero. And last but not the least, produce a localized policy guidance entitled as Philippine Cultural Heritage and the Sustainable Development Goals, Policy Guidance for Heritage and all development actors. The good news with this working plan is that it has been given preliminary approval by ICOMOS PH Board, and we are currently internally finalizing the final proposal to be submitted to ICOMOS PH Board. Now, it is targeted to start this May 2021 until August 2023 in celebration of ICOMOS Philippines' 35th and choral anniversary since its establishment. And that concludes our presentation. On behalf of the ICOMOS PH SDGs Working Group, we would like to thank everyone for their time and kind attention, and have a nice day.
Okay, thank you very much, Ken. I think that was quite a lot of information that has been given for quite a short time. But well, I'm a little bit biased, to be honest, because I mean, for me, I've seen this work, and congratulations to the team who has put it together. What I just want to highlight there is that what ICOMOS Philippines is doing is looking back at the activities that has been done, so that the heritage and sustainable development are seen in the same lens. So it is not really that if you think that the work that you do is not related to the sustainable development, and when you look back and see, it is actually possible to link some of that work. And I do hope that we as a working group reflect on our work and see how we can do that together, right? Okay. Do we have any pertinent questions to the presenters that we have, particularly to ISCARSA and ICOMOS Philippines? Okay, I have a question for Sola. Well, if people are thinking of a question, Sola, for your case study, are you still here? Are you still here, Sola? Okay.
Hi, Gabriel.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes. So you're still here, right? So, question. With regards to your Jekyll house, I know that there are a lot of challenges that you face, and do you think that having let's say the heritage became a means of having a background for a lot of more or activities, you know, they're of not just valorizing the heritage space but also celebrating it in different ways? How do you think that can be done more?
Thank you for the question. Quite thought-provoking because you know, and I think I mentioned that for us, it can't, the heritage, at least of this particular project, can't be the center because it is colonial. And because this is just about, we got our independence in 1960, you know, we're just about 60 years away from that. It's difficult for us to see this as something nice or our heritage because we had a very subjective role in that, and you know, all of the painful past and whatnot. So we had to almost relegate the actual heritage for this project and for British colonial projects that I've worked on in such a way that what brings people to the sites is something else entirely. And then when they come and they feel comfortable in the sites, they eventually get to see the heritage. But then what we're promoting is not British heritage. Of course, the building is, and the overall narrative is, but the content that is in there is purely, and we ensure that we make sure that it is purely Nigerian, purely local. And as much as possible, we try to put pre-colonial narratives and artifacts in there because we don't have those available almost anywhere. You know, there's a big gap for pre-colonial heritage. And we make the point to make it clear to people that what we're doing is not the end. You know, we're going through the colonial heritage because, you know, it's our heritage, it's part of the story, but we're not just going to stop there. We're going all the way back to pre-colonial heritage. So as much as possible, we'll do a lot of pre-colonial cultural events and things like that. And, you know, just try to attract people in with other things because, you know, nobody, you know, appreciates history that well because, you know, even the local one, too many people don't know about it, but we use the British one that is more visual, that is more widely seen to bring them in and then bring in the other pre-colonial content. I don't know if that answers your question somehow.
Great. I think it's basically you're saying that there's a lot more content that can be utilized within one site. Right?
Oh, yes.
Last question for ICOMOS Philippines. Now, I've seen this presentation, but just wanted to ask Chen if you're still here. With regards to financial issues, is Chen still around?
I think both of them are gone because they be somewhere.
Well, then the question is, can for you, thanks for what you've done. So I think it's time to talk to our policy guidance team. Ege is here and get in touch with Linda because the policy guidance and interpreting it to the local context is something that our policy guidance team is quite interested in. And I do hope that not just ICOMOS Philippines does it, but a lot of other people. Yeah.
Definitely, we'll get in touch in the future. Thank you very much, Sir Gab.
Okay, so I think we're over time. It's more than 2 hours. So I do hope that you had a good time, and you know, having these kinds of conversations is good. Our next meeting. Let me show my that slide for just to for everyone to know. The next meeting is happening on the 13th of May. This is going to be the strategic planning meeting, which we will be discussing our terms of reference, and also I think our colleagues from the urban partnerships will want to discuss with everyone. And then it will be more of the less sharing session, but I want to have some call for sharing sessions in the next couple of months. These are just ideas that I've had, but if you have any ideas of what you want to share, please reach out to me, and then we can discuss more on pertinent issues that are relevant to all of us. Okay, with that said, thank you very much, and have a good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Yeah.